Well, hello there, listening audience. This is Chris Burkhardt, president and founder of Placers. I'm here again with Brian Saleo. Welcome, sir.
Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm very good, but I bet you people don't know much about you, even though they've listened to you for many weeks now. Brian happens to be a lawyer. Don't hold it against him. He's a heck of a consultant. He's a very strong trainer and an important leader in the Placers business. And specifically, he oversees, really is responsible for all of our customer relationships. So it's kind of a big deal. As a business, Placers is second generation and have been around a long time. We're at a really interesting crossroads. The workforce needs us. We're a coach to that workforce. There's lots of situations today where people need help managing their career. They might need help with a resume. They might need a job. They might need to lead. So we provide that service. As complicating as the workforce is and the realities of that workforce realities are to our customers, they need help, and we always try to be a consultant to them and help them navigate how they get the most out of the workforce. We started this discussion, this podcast, if you will, because we heard from customers that they know we're innovative. We talk about having this sort of consultative way of operating, but it made sense to talk about the solutions that we help customers with or the problems that we solve for them. Today, we're kind of doing a switcheroo. If you've listened, I have had the pleasure of offering questions to Brian, and as solutions are, he's had a chance to respond. Today, we're going to reverse that. The solutions is going to throw some questions to the founder, and we'll see how I do. Take it away, brother.
All right. Well, looking forward to this. It'll be a little bit of a change of pace. And actually, I really enjoy hearing some of your war stories of the olden days when RPO was invented. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So
those were the days, Brian, where we had to wear suit jackets in our chairs, if you remember.
Oh, my God.
We might have to put a picture of what a suit jacket is up for the audience to see what we mean by such, artifact.
And people smoked cigarettes while they were sitting at their desk, and all kind. Then faxes were invented. I mean, all kinds of stuff.
My desk, I sat above this. It was a classic office, nondescript, nothing unique about it. It was an old ice building, so it had a cool exterior, but the ceiling was those bad that should have been white tiles, but they were yellow from years of smoking.
Yeah.
The smoking had been banned, but you're right, man. There was always a halo around those cubicles.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about an ice building is they never melt, which I can't figure out. I mean, it's really kind of fascinating if you think about it.
It was cold in there, come to think
I
of
bet
it.
It was. I'm sure it was. So anyway, so Chris, I know you've done a lot of work with RPO in the past. Just for those of our listeners out there who don't know what RPO is, can you kind of just give a quick summary?
Absolutely. So we banner around all these acronyms, and I know we've spent some time sort of unpacking them. But they're basically, I'm feeling like this was mid to late 80s. There was a rise in the concept of outsourcing in general. There was a discussion about how businesses wanted to define whatever it is that they did as their core, and they wanted to outsource things. And there was another acronym that was Business Process Outsourcing. And believe it or not, that's the rise of what you've asked me about, which is RPO, or Recruitment Process Outsourcing. And all it is that businesses figured out that business wasn't steady Eddie. That, back in the day, a personnel department hired you when you started, made sure you got your payroll and benefits, and on some day down the line, they gave you your gold watch, right? You kind of stuck it out with that business. But all of a sudden, 80s, 90s, there was kind of almost a roller coaster ride of ups and downs of business, of demand for products, but as you might imagine, also for labor in those businesses. And there was almost a desperate cry to, like, if you're corporate America, if you're a personnel department, human resources, how do I manage those ups? So recruitment process outsourcing is when, let's say, a bank or a manufacturing company needs to have recruiting done, but wants to outsource it to a partner that oversees all facets of it.
Okay. Interesting. So when you think about, a company that's got a hiring need, what type of hiring need comes to mind that RPO really is a good fit for?
Well, I think the first thing is to talk about the language of corporate America. What's the staffing industry has its own lingo. We talk about sales and quotas and targets, and we're always sort of this internal joke of chasing a job order, and all that is when a client company says, "Sure, Brian, you can work on my opening," but that's like the holy grail. Like we sort of chase job orders. But this RPO thing, this recruitment process outsourcing thing, is very different. You have to become capable of understanding and interpreting the world of your bank or your manufacturing customer. So in that world, it's very, very different. It kind of starts with understanding the goals of that organization and, what are they trying to get done with recruiting? But specifically, it's when someone has a volume of positions that causes some volatility. It's very different depending on skill set. If you're going to hire 600 CPAs, it's a different set of skill sets and volume of people and timeline than if you're going to hire 600 manufacturing leads for a high-tech plant. And there's so many factors that goes into it. But it's where somebody has a need to ramp up quickly based on a big business win and they don't have the internal resources. Or what I find is they've decided that recruiting is not their core. And that means they don't want to invest in recruitment technology, kind of the CRM of recruiting, if you will. They don't want to scale recruitment leadership to manage it. They don't know how to score whether they're winning or losing. And maybe hiring recruiters and managing them is not something that they really want to do. And that reminds me, the reason this became so relevant, things are driven by events, Brian. And there were so many scenarios that I remember where a talent acquisition leader, a recruitment manager, recession times, gets told that they have to lay off their staff. And it doesn't matter if they're 6 or 60. Well, guess what? Those stories of the last envelope being for them are true. Get through your day, lay your people off, and then you open the envelope and go, "Oh man, it's me."
Yeah.
And what that did, let's face it, we're talking about the pendulum swing of business, which is the same swing of hiring. What ended up happening is that firm that laid off everybody, including the leader, eventually has to hire again. And I think there was a lot of fatigue that they remembered that. And do they really want to hire that leader and then the whole team and then face it again? So people started to outsource this en masse.
Gotcha. So it seems to me that in doing something like that, you've really become an extension of the customer and their talent acquisition area. Talk a little bit about, how do you become part of the company? How do you learn their culture and what are the keys to doing that?
It's one of the most interesting and rewarding but challenging parts of what we do in that. So you have to lay out for a customer a process of discovery, of getting to know them that they value. You've got to help them understand that all that information is relevant to them trusting or really entrusting you to take over something. So I've always tried to share that if you're going to give me the keys to your car, your castle, or whatever metaphor works, then I need to demonstrate for you an ability to gather and fact find and understand your current state of how you do everything, because then I can set goals based on our expertise to help you get to where you want to go. Now, that discovery process, as you might imagine, there's templates of questions, there's buckets of information that you need to gather. But in the spirit of it, it's usually around people practices. It's around technology that they use and or don't use. And that we should get back to that. I'll make sure to talk about that technology thing and how that determines what a customer should think about.
Right.
You're looking at processes.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have good processes and standard operating procedures? Or as part of this, a lot of times they're outsourcing it. If all a firm does is recruit and optimize recruiting processes for customers, you might imagine over time, I mean, it's not fancy strategy, but those processes of hiring get optimized. Every step gets improved constantly. So there's opportunities for, I'm not going to call it perfection, but betterment that corporate America really doesn't have access to because they don't get to do the reps. It's like when we work out. If we do it once a month, you don't really get much gain. But we work out in recruiting all the time.
Sure.
And so you've got people, culture, practices. You've got technology. I mentioned SOPs and procedures. But the last thing is the outcomes. And I do find, Brian, a lot of times, this is the most interesting part of it, and I wish everybody could see you smile. Those that are pondering this aren't really sure about what outcomes are possible. They're not sure about what they should be because they're probably not measuring these things currently. So part of their attraction, and what am I talking about specifically in recruiting? Perhaps they're being challenged to lower the costs of hiring for their business, but they have no baseline of data to know what hiring costs now. So they're looking to outsource it. So here's the interesting thing I always like to say. I guarantee you I'm going to be more efficient if you outsource your recruiting to me because I have to be profitable to do it. I am a P&L. When you do recruiting, you're an expense. Our motivations are differently. So I'm going to have to optimize this and get as efficient as possible. And the cool thing is you get to hold me accountable to agreed upon standards with results. In fact, you're big into this. We do it all the time. We call that a service level agreement. And frankly, that also sounds like it's hard. But in reality, if someone's going to outsource to you and I, and they do every day, they need to know what's our scorecard of whether we're winning or losing. You know, do we get enough hits at when we're at bat? Did we produce enough outcomes? So many times in RPO, we're held to costs. We might be held to quality being people showing up or their success once they're there. And of course, in today's day and age, you can expect that diversity, equity, and inclusion are an awful important part of those outcomes.
And, you know, I wanted to dig in a little deeper on the outcomes. So talk a little bit about, you know, how do you come up with what those desired outcomes are? Is it something you present to the customer? Is it a collaborative thing? And what kinds of outcomes typically are you looking at?
So I want to lay one thing out first that I think is very important, is there are two problems we solve or solutions that customers seek. One is what we're talking about currently, which is this full outsourcing of tech and process and outcomes, and I'll come right back to that. But there's a whole set of customers that simply want to rent talent. Mm-hmm. And I know we've talked a lot about that in previous series, but I'm not sure people have a mindset about renting the talent of recruiters, mm-hmm. of those that source, of those that do full cycle recruiting, of those that do interviewing, of those that are, you know, facilitate internal discussions and things that help set up proper hiring. That is still relatively unique, even though the use of a freelance gig or contract worker is all over the organizational chart. For some reason, that still seems to be kind of a mind bender. But in reality, if you can't get buy-in to change all those other things, it isn't a bad idea to rent really good talent to help you get outcomes. But you have to understand, in that world, your outcomes are limited to the variables that your business has put in place. Brian, if you send me to that manufacturing company I keep referencing, I have to use their technology. I've got to deal with their people. I've got to use their hiring process. So I can be the best, you know, Swiss Army knife or parachute jumper or Green Beret recruiter in the world, but I'm going to be limited to the variables that where we put our people. So that's one thing to think about. Now, coming up with outcomes, it's a process of education. When you and I buy technology with our home provider of internet, we don't realize it, but they guarantee us an uptime. That's a service level agreement. We don't look at it because we're consumers, but hey, when your internet's down for a few days, it doesn't make you feel any better, but you do get a lousy credit on your monthly bill, right? You do it for what that's worth. So take that consumer thing and understand that we have the very difficult, arduous job of setting up a service level for our recruiting outcomes. And I find that it's a process of education. And in almost every case, we're providing education on a qualitative, quantitative, and an administrative aspect of our relationship. And you can ask me to drill down if you would like, but we're usually introducing those categories. And then we're maybe capturing data for the first time. So what usually happens is it used to be 6 months, Brian. Every customer gave you 6 months to get your fact finding right, your data right, your systems right, but now it's unfortunately or fortunately, the world's sped up. So what you end up doing is collecting data for 90 days, if you're lucky. And then based on that 90 days, oh, your costs are $5,000 per hire. That feels good. Let's set that as a goal. Or no, it's got to get lower, and here's why. Or maybe it's too low. Maybe we squeezed it so much that the quality of hire sacrificed a bit. So maybe you raise that to $6,000. But I kind of like to think about it as almost like a triangle. Every side has to be equal. So if you start squeezing price and quality and service too much, you don't get the outcome that you need for the culture and situation of your customer. And we get a lot of that. The best customers are trying to get a handle and to get data on something they don't typically track.
Right.
The best customers respect that and understand that it's a journey, and they want us to win too. And I'll bring it back to my goal is I have to make a fair return, a profit on this. So you better understand that I'm going to be as efficient as humanly possible, because my outcome needs to be better than you doing it just as an expense. And that's fair or unfair reality.
Yeah. And, I think one of the challenges to that, like you said, is you don't have a past, generally speaking, to compare to. It's usually things they weren't measuring all along. They just know it's broken, but they don't know the details of how it's broken.
And I've got 30 years in this, so if any of my past customers are listening, one of the most subtle parts to it is most customers don't want to really admit what they don't know in this area. It's hard because there's a sense of pride. Or what I usually find, and again, the peaks and valleys of the world have been amazing. Talk about the last year, the peaks and valleys of business and hiring and demand. I mean, that's a different podcast topic, but it's very relevant to the world of RPO in that what was a great HR department, an incredible recruiting team, was decimated by factors that they had no control over. Yeah. And we see that all the time. We see that with everything. And I mean, it makes great people to make up our programs, and people change and things evolve and situations morph, and all that comes into play. It needs to be managed. That's sort of the point of all this, is that, the oversight of this, setting goals, what does winning look like? I think that's the big thing, is an organization ready to think that way? Because sometimes they're not.
Right.
They're not like, I was invited to a customer's location this week, and they were very proud of the fact that they don't measure the costs of their hiring. And as you might imagine, I had a little fun with them. So I said, you have no budget. You could just charge whatever you want. They said, no, absolutely not. So I said, you do care. Yeah, but truth is, once we gain that respect, they said, truth is, we haven't settled on a formula that we all agree with about the costs that go into hiring. Yeah. And I said, that's, maybe a problem we could solve, Brian. If you trust us, maybe we could help you benchmark what might be the right formula for you. That's progress for them.
For sure. So how big can these get? I mean, how many recruiters, how many hires, what does it look like typically?
Well, what I have seen happen is, for the longest time, Brian, This was used for an organization that hired 500 and up for the longest time. As market conditions have changed, as there's more competition, I've seen organizations, including placers and other subsidiaries of our business, we've had success doing it with 100 hires for a company a year. But that's a very lean program where your resources might not even be full-time on that customer. It's more complex to manage. So this is 500 and up. The largest I know of is a healthcare unit that hires 55,000 people a year in New York City and have for like 10 years running. So you might imagine there's thousands of job descriptions and skill sets. I think there's over 200 people dedicated to that hiring program.
Wow.
And their costs per hire are everything from $500 for a certain type of clerk. And then they have costs that are like $17,000 for the medical scientists and things. That organization is getting a big break. If they were to hire that medical scientist thing as a one-off, they'd probably pay $200,000. But 55,000 hires guarantees some economies of scale.
Sure.
That's kind of just a case study that I'm aware of. I can't imagine they hired 55,000 last year. And that's the thing. So what happens when a program like that rolls along for 5, 6, 7 years? Well, we're not going to hire. Smart programs have some kind of administrative fee that keeps the program alive. But honestly, people begrudgingly pay that. It backs up. I mean, what are you going to do with all those people sitting around? People bought it because it can ramp up and down, but the ramp downs are kind of ugly.
Yeah. So if I'm a business and I need to hire 5 or 10 people because of a busy season coming up or something like that, is RPO something that's an option for me?
So it's a really fun question. I'm glad you asked it because it's sort of the in-betweener. It's like a teenager that's not quite an adult. It's not really a big program, but it's not really a little program. Our industry would do two things. They'd say, Brian, would you like to use them? How about if they're all temporary or temp to hire? And again, we won't go into that, assuming people have heard that, but they're going to, why don't you do contractors? Well, no, that's not what I want. I want them to be on my core team right away. That's our culture. That's what we want. The other alternative is someone would try and come up with some sort of mid-level volume program, some headhunting program, some direct hire program. Well, no, I appreciate that, Brian, but when I look at that, that's still really kind of expensive. Back to us thinking like a customer, that's a fee. It's a generous fee. But if that organization is thinking about things like cost per hire, man, you blend that in, they're going to have to hire a lot of their own people to offset the costs of the fees that they might pay. So RPO is interesting. There's the concept of project RPO. And again, this is a really good scenario where maybe you rent a recruiter. We call it recruiter on demand. You know a lot about it. I know a lot about it. Ironically, its roots were we would just work with customers that had lots of temporary employees. And I'm talking late 80s, early 90s. Those customers would call up and say, is Mary available? Is John available? We're going to do a hiring event. Can we just borrow them? Well, before you knew it, we were being asked to borrow staff a lot. And the customer said, well, what are you going to charge us? And after a while, literally, that's what, to me, is the most honest, authentic example of solutions-based thinking that we're talking about, problems we solve. Customers asked us to do something. Most people said, no, I don't do that. But I grew up in a culture that said, yeah, let's figure that out. And guess what? 28 years later, it's a revenue stream. But most importantly, it's a problem that our customers respect that we have the capabilities to solve. So in that scenario, I'd probably say rent a recruiter for a month or two. But I know your expertise would say, well, Chris, the 12 positions matter. If they're 12 scientists, it's probably not cost effective, or it could be. It depends on, back to understanding that customer, how quickly do they need them, what's a reasonableness to the costs of what we do, and you just sort of figure out whether or not it makes sense to them from a dollars and cents perspective and a time perspective.
You know, and I think that's part of what I really enjoy the most about what I get to do every day is, you know, at Placers, I'm not really pigeonholed into, you know, this is the product or a solution for a particular situation. Everything's literally on the table, and we can customize anything depending on, you know, are you hiring 5 or you're hiring 50,000, you know?
And I think what's so interesting about that, and again, this is a bit of, you know, a little Nostradamus in staffing here, a little futurist kind of comments. I know you and I share a thought that what's really happening with hiring is that if you bring a gig worker in, freelance, contract, temporary, it's all the same. Your procedures to get them to work look eerily similar if you want that role filled by what we would call a core employee.
Right.
You got to have a background. I mean, you could do it better than me. Just about everything's the same. Is anything not the same?
Really, no. I mean, it really is the same thing.
You got to do non-competes. You got to do agreements. You got to orient someone to safety and culture and procedures. Mm-hmm. You've got offer letters. You've got drug tests, background tests. I'm missing stuff, but it's the same. But what's ironic is the workforce is also the same. And in reality, it's only the organization's mindset and the worker's mindset that's different. And one time I come in, I'm a customer service rep. I meet with you as a recruiter. You know what? I'm going to be traveling this summer, Brian. I can work between now and July 31st. Well, I'm a great temp. If I come in and say, I just got back from my trip and I'm ready to work, all of a sudden I'm a great core hire. And right. Obviously organizations have that same mindset. Hey, this works only to the end of July. We don't need someone forever. Or, oh, you know what? We're really ramping up and we have confidence that this is really the long haul. I think that's what the world needs to embrace a little bit more and be honest about that. Workers and businesses, if they would embrace that, it'd be a whole heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. So I think you alluded to it earlier, but we're not just talking about the people. There's a technology piece to this as well. Talk a little bit about the technology that's involved. How do we add that to the equation for a customer?
It's a tough question. You know, there's this concept of a technology stack. And quite frankly, if an organization is going to do recruiting, they've got to think about their technology stack. Or if you're going to hire somebody, you got to do it. So what it comes down to is that there's parts to the technology that automate or make efficient various aspects of the recruiting process. So the world needs some way to interact with the applicant's pool. And that's a tracking system of some kind. Think customer relationship software for your hiring process. But the stack is all the steps of things today. You better be thinking about remote interviewing and probably remote hiring. So your video technology that stacks in that. The fact is, this isn't the old days where we're all going to a cafeteria of a local community center, setting up a booth for a job fair. Today, that stack is using all kinds of technology to make people aware, probably on their smartphone and maybe by text, of that maybe we have a shift and they can accept their shift on that phone.
Yeah.
And there's just so much related to improving the experience of your applicant, but lowering costs of that whole process and time of that process. Mm-hmm. So technology for the sake of it, that doesn't make sense. A part of our value creation is by putting that stack together in such a way, well, like I keep saying, I think it's worth repeating because I think it's direct. I have to make money on something that was just an expense for you, so I'm going to be more efficient than you. That's the name of this game. And we're still working on that. And this isn't made up discussion. This is the really hard part. This is the unique value. And everybody does this differently. And I think I could get you to say that this is our greatest area of opportunity in the next 1 to 3 years, where we've got a great culture, productive workforce, and our opportunities to improve this stack as technology gets more effective and more efficient. There's just so much upside to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. So if I'm a customer out there and I'm interested in learning more about what placers might be able to do for me, what do I do? How do I reach out?
Well, our website, any search on the internet, you'll find myplacers.com, and there's easy forms. And frankly, I think there's phone numbers for you and I and emails for you and I. So if I would suggest this, if your interest is in RPO or renting a recruiter, I would probably suggest pinging myself or Brian, just because we can connect it back to you hearing us on this discussion. If you're interested in something else, then reach out to whoever your interest is. I imagine we'll do more on this topic because it's one of the more complex ones. And as I've been saying, a lot of our discussion comes from what our clients and prospects are saying to us. And we're just realizing if 5 are saying it, maybe 50 more should hear it.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, this was fun. I'm glad we had to talk about
Rate me. Hold up a rating sign.
I would say you probably did 9.5 out of 10.
Wow, I'm appreciative of that. I've got room to improve, though.